Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you are, and a very warm welcome at this webinar where we are going to discuss a circular future for the European construction sector. And we're going to focus there on light commercial and residential buildings. We are really happy to have so many of you join today, and we really encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A part at the bottom of this slide. My name is Mark de Wit. I'm director of all our business engagements at Circle Economy. We are an impact organization with 60 people working out of Amsterdam, and we really help businesses, cities, and national governments to become practical about what it means to implement circular economy solutions. And I think the topic of today is crucially important, as the built environment globally is responsible for about half of all the material consumption, is a crucial contributor also to global emissions. So there's really something at stake today. Before we really dive into the specific topic of the report, its outcomes, and also inviting the panelists to exchange on this, I would like to take no more than 5 minutes to really kick us off and set the scene a bit and kind of see what we're talking about and what is crucial and also apparent today. So if you go to the next slide, very quickly walking you through the agenda. So we'll have a quick setting the scene, then we'll start in the panel discussion, and we'll have a Q&A with you, with the audience, towards the end of the call before we close. So going to the next slide, I think it's important and interesting as we come out of 2 weeks of negotiations in Egypt during the COP with, I think, very mixed outcomes. On the one hand, good progress on a fund between kind of the global north, the people and the countries that have been majorly responsible to cause the situation we're in, and helping those that are most affected by this situation, but also understanding that to keep this planet on a 1.5 degree pathway, we need to do more. And we need to do more from the public sector, but surely the private sector has a huge role to play. And I think that's what we're going to focus on today, against the backdrop of some unparalleled changes that we have seen in recent times. We just come out of 2 years of lockdown across the globe. We have the situation in Ukraine that is increasing inflation at a record high. It's surging energy prices, which is affecting our manufacturing production, but also affecting private households in terms of their energy bills. So we have a lot of elements to look at. And really what the current situation exposes is some of the cracks in the system that have been there for quite some time, but are really kind of coming to the surface with an ever more and more impactful outcome for society. And we know what this all has meant. If you go back to the previous slide a little bit more, so we currently live in this world that is 1.1 degree warmer than what we had 200 years ago. And we've seen these forest fires in the region of Bordeaux in France this summer. We've seen floods in Pakistan. We've seen droughts across the globe and really more extreme weather events everywhere, which is not only affecting personal livelihoods, but also the resilience of global supply chains. And what we want to add to that, to kind of the challenges we face, is also move in the direction of the solution space. And what we at Circle Economy launch every year is our Circularity Gap Report. We are currently finalizing the report that will be launched next January in Davos. And if you go to the next slide, a very central part of that is that we want to look at the state of circularity of our global economy. And this is the material X-ray that we launched for the fifth time this year. And it really shows you how basic materials satisfy basic human needs. And if you go to the next slide, what I want to focus and call out here is that we currently, as a global economy, use more than 100 billion tons of stuff every year. And on the next slide, you'll see that where we put that into, and why we have those, why we extract all of those materials, is to satisfy our need for housing, for mobility, for nutrition, for communication, for healthcare. And of course, and you see the big blue on the right, this is the topic that we'll discuss today. So our to satisfy our housing need, our infrastructure need, almost half or a very considerable part of that puzzle is related to the construction sector. And then if you go to the next slide, what we'll see, and what we also wanted to focus on, is if you look at the end of use. So if we have constructed this building, what is the end result? And you see that a lot of the materials get emitted because they go into the air in the form of carbon dioxide. A lot is dispersed, for example, plastic drifting into our rivers, into our oceans. A lot is being added to our stock. We're building more houses, more infrastructure, more offices for more people on the planet that live more prosperous lives. And about a third is actually wasted out of everything we use, of which only a very small fraction is cycled back into our economy. So our conclusion at this point was that we live in a world that's 9% circular at the moment. So there is a huge circularity gap to fill. But then coming from the analysis on the next slide to the solution space, because that is, of course, where it becomes interesting, we have looked at 21 solutions, circular solutions that we need to implement to keep the planet on a Paris-compatible 1.5-degree pathway. And what you see here in the different colors is the different needs it relates to. And in blue, and this is no surprise, that is construction again. Green is nutrition, red is mobility. So you see that the majority of the solution space to fix this problem is by reducing the material use, by keeping the buildings we have in place in operation longer, by cycling more if it comes to the end of life. So there is a big role to play here. And then on the next slide, what we wanted to do and what we have been focusing on, Bain Company and Circle Economy, in the writing of these reports, is we wanted to double click on this global issue and really move it to the continent of Europe. Not because elsewhere on the planet it's not equally important, but just to make that very specific to the context relating to policy, relating to actual companies focusing and active in this sector. So we focused on Europe. As I already started to introduce, we've had two very engaging webinars earlier today, one on the automotive sector, one looking at machinery and equipment. And here we want to look with you at the construction sector. So with that, let me hand it over to my dear colleague, Sami, to take us along in the outcomes of the report and start introducing the panelists so we can really get the discussion going. Thank you. Sami, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark. Good afternoon and good morning, perhaps. Thank you so much, dear audiences, and also thank you so much to dear panelists for taking the time to be present today with us during the presentation of our collaboration report with Bain Company on the circular future for the European construction sector. In this report, we have considered light commercial and residential buildings. I would like to start with a couple of quotes from the report, which is a very good highlight to maybe as a starting point before delving into the more insight from the report. In the report, you will see that 30% of emissions from buildings are released during the production phase as embodied carbon. And this is a drastic amount of carbon we are discussing and we came across with. Circularity in the building material is very critical if we want to and if we are aiming to reduce the impacts of embodied carbon and contribute to the net zero initiatives and targets. Ongoing building trends in office work and renovation is leading to improved circular outcomes through expected decrease in new building demand. By saying that, I would like to go to the next slide, where we will, I would like to pinpoint to some of the key insights from the report. The report, during the analysis, we realized that the European construction sector is only 30% circular as of today. Policies and regulations have helped a lot in supporting the initiatives, but among that, they were mainly and historically very strongly focused on end of life of recovery and recycling. And this needs to be taken further to more upstream level, and we need more policies and regulations to support us there. Disruptors and innovators in the scene, in the circularity, are very vital. They have created a lot of opportunities through robotics, AI, whether it's material innovation, bio-based materials, biogenic materials. We see a movement, a revolution happening for the past years, and we need to pay more attention in those areas. And they are the ones, these disruptors and innovators are going to help us in the transition successfully. Building material companies, we came to the solution that through taking 3 actions, they can help us in increasing the circularity of the sector to 50% by 2040. And these 3 actions are navigating the circular material disruption, setting goals higher, aiming for better and improved material consistency and material technology, whether it's going to be through different strategies that we will also come up with in the next slides. These companies need to plan for commercialization. They need support on the commercial. Sorry, if you can go stay on the first slide. Yes, please. Thank you. Yes, commercialization is in the discussion, how we can support, how a public sector can support the private sector in their commercialization, but the commercialization and scaling up those solutions is the way forward. Securing cost competitiveness in order for different companies to access those materials, also very important action that needs to be taken. Next slide, please. As we said, European construction sector at the moment is only 30% circular. These materials, the current material use at the European level is mainly extracting raw materials and partially coming from bio-based industry in a very small amount, and this needs to be pushed further if we want to increase our initiative and our targets. And in the European countries, majority of existing floor space is occupied by residential and commercial activities. And if we are increasing the housing, we need to think together between the commercial buildings and residential buildings in how to utilize the spaces better in a more efficient way. Next slide, please. As you see here, inputs into the construction is dominated by highly intensive carbon materials, including metals, insulation materials, a lot of concrete, which is not a surprise, and wood materials in a lot less compared to the other materials. And these materials that we are mapping, you can see here now on the slide, a mapping of the flows, material flows into the system. You can see a lot of material is going through new building projects and less in the renovation. However, renovation is a big target area. And the idea is that how we can balance between the supply and demand from the new build to the renovation and retrofit projects in order to enhance the material usage. Next slide, please. And again, here you can see the high recycling. Through our analysis, we realized that the materials are being highly recycled and low circular content is being used. So this is also gives us a doorway to an opportunity where how to enhance the market in terms of bringing more recycled content into the material usage, and how to loop back the materials into their original manufacturing and enhance the circularity of the sector. We need also to utilize more renewable materials, as they are also less carbon intensive. More details of this analysis you can access to the report. Well, at the end of the webinar, we will share the report with you. So if you're interested, you can read more details. Next slide, please. Our aim from the report is that we would like to hit 50% increase in circularity by year 2040. And we have identified 5 strategies or 5 levers for change. And through these 5 levers for change, which include utilization and renovation projects, we will increase circularity by 2.5%. By lightweighting strategy, lightweighting methods and innovations in the materiality of products, we can increase circularity by 4.4%. Recycled content, the more recycled content we put into materials, of course, we are stopping them from going to the incineration and landfills. 4.2% will be achieved increased in circularity. Renewable material use, such as CLT and timber, will help us up our game to 6.1%, and recovery services and technologies, returning back the materials to the cycle and using them back, 3.6%. And next slide, please. So these are the levers for change, and of course we reanalyze the flows back to the system by using these strategies, and we came up with a good result of 50%. As I mentioned, CLT is going to help us on the renewable materials a lot. And by reducing, if you want to achieve 20% reduction in carbon footprint, this is how we're going to achieve it, through different levers and strategies. Next slide, please. In this slide, you will see the 5 levers that we just discussed and also discussed in the report. Circularity impacts, emission impacts. You can see that the emission impact and the circularity impact is highest in the regenerating strategy. Of course, renewable materials help us a lot. Bio-based materials are also fit into this category that we are hoping to push for that. And obviously, it's going to be the most financially impact and financially intensive requirement is coming from utilization and renovation project, which actually is going to help the decarbonization as well as maintaining the existing building stock and existing buildings. By saying that, I would like to introduce our panelist of today. I would like to introduce Adrian Braun, partner at Bain Company, here today with us. Christian Wedler, Senior Associate at 3XN Architects. And Luc Delstrade, Head of Energy and Environment at Distinct Energies. Thank you so much and welcome to the discussion panel today.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Fami. Well,
I'm going to read a quick biography of our panelists for the audiences, so to become more familiar. I'll start with Adrian. Adrian is a leader in Bain's advanced manufacturing and services, specializing in construction and building materials, products, and technology. Adrian works with clients on large-scale transformation that require in-depth strategic and organizational change, such as M&A and new business ventures. Besides this, he's one of the Bain's technology IoT expert in industrial sector and helps companies navigate the design tech, building tech, construction tech landscape. Welcome, Adrian.
thank you, Sami. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Luc Delstrade, Head of Energy and Environment Department at Distinct Energies. Luc is a specialist in energetic system. He has over 20 years of professional working in international projects, including the wind farm development in the UK, as well as Olympic Village in Vancouver, Dubai waterfront, museums in Philippines, and many more international projects. Luc is attracted by the intellectual simulation and energy analysis, and he believes that energy analysis is a design-making tool to build performing buildings in their climate. To this extent, Luc has led new buildings and retrofit projects in achieving their energy reduction and carbon goals. Welcome, Luc.
Thanks, very flattering.
Thank you. Next panelist, Christian Wedler, Senior Associate at 3XN Architects. Christian is an architect based in Amsterdam. He has a focus on design excellence, innovation, sustainability, entrepreneurship. Christian has recently joined 3XN GXN Architects, and he was previously a director at UN Studio, a renowned Dutch architecture firm. Christian's involvement in academia includes numerous teaching positions and visiting professorships, amongst others, at ETH Zurich, Harvard University, and Delft University of Technology. Welcome, Christian. Look forward to the discussion now.
Thank you very much, Sami.
Okay, I will start with Adrian. Adrian, as mentioned during the presentation now, and also the work we have done on the report, lightweighting has been identified as one of the main measures to circularity by 2040. How viable are the existing business cases, and what needs to be done to accelerate and scale?
Yeah, thanks, Sami. This is a good question, right? So unfortunately, the answer is not yet too optimistic. The business cases are viable, but in very small scale. And the reason is that in construction, as you might know very well, a lot of incentives are misaligned, and therefore the owner and buyer of a building, a construction project, is a different person than the one designing it, than the one actually constructing it. And lightweighting efforts require quite a collaboration across the construction chain, from the designer upstream to the trades and contractors that actually perform the construction, install the materials and the products, all the way to the owners that must see and finance this at the end of the project. And therefore, while we have very promising lightweighting applications and opportunities, and we have a lot of if you think about aerated concrete, already lightweighted materials in construction, a broader use and a broader deployment will require an intense collaboration between the three parties that I mentioned, and this is typically where construction is struggling. And that's why you rightly called for policies and ultimately fiscal and policy intervention, because this is the construction sector has never really moved without those, and this will be also necessary in deploying lightweighting to a larger scale.
That's exactly what we need to do, with the help from the regulation, which are coming, also the new regulations, and also innovation of the materials. I would like to now turn to Luc, Luc, we just also mentioned that the heavy financial direction, a heavy financial support is going to go towards the retrofit and renovation projects. And that's what we have calculated and analyzed is about 1 trillion euros of investment going to these kind of projects. And this is the forecast for, and it's going to increase as we are heading on to 2040. Could you tell us how have you been involved in these projects, and how these projects will increase the value of the built asset in the coming years?
So just to give you a picture back on the status between new and existing, the existing building and retrofit is roughly, depending on the country, between 85 to 95 of the building stocks. New building is always exciting because you have a white sheet of paper and you can apply any new startup, disruptive, reflective, or anything you can create it. But when we're talking about circular economy and the actual situation on materials, carbon, energy, you have to play with what you have. So that's the trend at the moment. Everybody talk about carbon, but carbon cannot be the only one issue. And that's what circular is, the broader vision of where we should go. Because when you have an existing building, the first question is, will my building hold? So quite structural question. Second question is how the performance of the shell of my building, what will be the usage of my building, and how long will I be using my building before changing it again? So already on these 4 questions, you already talked to 4 different experts. And the idea is on the future is try to value what we have, to utilize it, and to reduce the amount of new things, because that's what's cost a lot on materials, energy, and whatever is the added materials to the new life of the building. And the trend of retrofitting right now is reducing the energy bill to allow people to engage money somewhere else, like living, heating, or moving, and afterwards trying to move toward the health, because if they manage to keep a warm place, that will reduce the healthcare employment. So it's like the butterfly effect that Mark mentioned quite early on, differently when he mentioned the heat wave, the flood, the war in Ukraine, maybe the ship block in Egypt, and so on. So it's all that butterflies that we need to look at, step back and look at globally what will be the impact and the weight. And I think that what the next coming year will be a big juggler between every solution, and financial help will be very at use, that's for sure, to embrace these changes. Sorry.
Excellent. And of course, we need the help of designers and
course.
architects as well to help us achieving in that. And I would like to now turn to Christian and ask him about the role of architects and how the architects and designers can embed circular business models into their operation in order to meet the targets and help us in the movement.
Yes, thanks, Sammy. It was a nice bridge that you built. Maybe just to quickly recap, we come from a linear economy thinking, which obviously is limited because it doesn't provide any life cycle perspective. And as we have heard before, construction is deeply embedded in this linear logic. And that basically causes planning efforts to usually stop with the delivery of a built project. So there is no consideration of later stages, which basically take the majority of the life cycle of a building. And we have also heard this before, but maybe good to repeat it. Resource depletion, waste, pollution, emission of global greenhouse gases is a big problem. Embracing the circular economy means, maybe to simplify it, to avoid such negative impact. And I think for architecture, there's an opportunity, as up to 70–80% of a building's environmental impact is determined at the design stage. So I think it's safe to say that instead of focusing on building design alone, that just wants to deliver a finished building, the focus of architecture should be on design impacting the whole building life cycle. And I think just briefly, this has profound impact of the role of the architect, of the business model of architecture. And obviously it also shows a lot of opportunities for us, for extended scope, for new types of services. So we could take into consideration design for end of use strategies, which would provide possibilities for cycling or recycling. Maybe even better than recycling would be to avoid end of life stages as such. So design for prolongation of in-use stages of buildings would be good. So you could describe this as extending. Design for additional or alternative uses would be good. This is especially important for underutilized assets. We know all the empty office floors that are only activated 2/3 of their time. Even then they're underutilized large scale. We also could take into consideration dematerialization, this digital design for substitution of building components, right, by a virtual model. So we could use the virtual model for simulation in the design process, but also for real-time measurement of actual building performance. As such, I think I said building a business model, there could be additional services that are interesting, but also could generate added value in the value chain, which would be, yes, design services for circular design, but there also could be premium fees for circular building design. There could be data that's delivered and maybe sold for access for use. And performance-based contracts are an interesting story because we could incentivize and reward desirable building performance. Maybe just quickly, I think this would challenge the typical architecture model, and we would go more into selling outcomes and not hours necessarily.
Yes, that's a very good point, actually, Christian, and how we can move from new building projects in thinking about end of life of buildings and start designing from the existing buildings. And of course, the innovation and technology helps us a lot. And I would like to now ask Adrian if we have been in discussion also before the webinar that there's different levers in the construction sector. We also discussed about, we know that the sector is currently downcycling, and we need to move, if we want to hit our targets, we need to move from downcycling more towards upcycling. How do you see that coming, and how this is possible? Yes, and how? Yes, who needs to be there in order to help us in achieving?
Yeah, Sami, and I will follow up on Christian as well, answering your question. And of course, the construction industry, downcycles a lot, right? Just picture a building that is being crushed, right? This goes into roads, right? So, and into infrastructure project, or so the circularity, point, from a downcycling point of view is actually not that bad. The problem is that we are not, upcycling or not recycling properly, and the materials are not getting used to their full value. And for that, I think Christian said rightly, we need to internalize the externalities that exist in construction, back into the design. And so this is, we talk here about a change of how the value chain operates, right? Today, this is a fragmented value chain with designers handing over a plan to constructors, handing over a building to owners. This, model is a model that is very specific to construction. If you think about any other industry, the value chain doesn't happen like this, right? So, the car designer is also the car manufacturer, and, more and more with mobility, it is actually the car owner and operator, right? And so in order for that to happen in construction, and I would like to come back to Christian, what do you think about design, build, operate business model, and why do you think this is not, picking up more in our economy? Because on paper, at least it would be a solution to many of the problems we talk about here.
Christian, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I just have to unmute myself. I think we have a big challenge there, because I think the focus is very much on the capital expenditure of construction itself. So this is the majority of the focus at the moment, which of course includes both design and construction. Design being a tiny part of it, construction being the bigger part of it. We completely leave out of sight the operation of the building, the life cycle, including the end of life, but also we leave completely out of the equation the business operation cost. There is this famous 1:5 to 200 ratio. I don't know if you know it, which puts into relation construction costs to operation costs to business operation costs, which of course is highly generalized, but I think shows very much where basically we are wrong, focusing only on the construction as the initial part of a project, completely leaving out the entire life cycle of operation, which is significantly more, 5 times as much. And we do not take into consideration all things necessary to make business operation run smoothly, because this is the biggest factor of this comparison. And I would always argue, maybe also coming from a circular perspective, to see where the additional potential for architects or for designers would be, that we have to introduce another factor, which would be not the typical 0.7 times 1 times 5 times 200, 0.7, representing here the typical architecture fee, that is 0.7 of construction costs, which is nothing in comparison to all the other figures that we see. If we could spend a little bit more time at the initial phase of the project, where so many things are defined for the future and for the lifecycle performance, we would be better off with all of the following numbers after one another. And I think that sort of disintegration of this value chain, I think, is very nicely shown with this, I agree, overgeneralized, but still, I think, almost metaphorical number comparison that we have here. And I think that that would be something to attack. At the moment, there is no or little incentive for construction industry to do different. There is very little incentives there to bridge all the gaps between the stage gate planning processes that we have. And if we take into consideration that the end user or the larger public that is heavily affected by projects is not even sitting at the table as a stakeholder when decisions are taken, basically it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think, Christian, just as a follow-up, this is a very good answer, right? So, you know, the business models along the construction value chain are so radically different in terms of economic profiles. You know, the intensity of capex, you know, of owners, you know, the type of quality capabilities and people that you need in designers and architect business model, and the field force and, you know, utilization, you know, driven parameters that a construction company follows, that, you know, reassembling this different, you know, I would say drivers of, you know, value creation and profit in one firm has proven very, very difficult today. Although this is the answer to re-internalize what you described as being fragmented. Yeah.
Yes, that's a very good, actually, a follow-up, Adrian. Now I would like to see what Luc thinks, especially Luc, you're coming from an energy transition. You've done a lot of, you helped a lot of projects achieving their energy reduction and a lot of retrofit projects as well. How do you see this happening, working within the design teams and setting business models that is going to be successful?
I think I will. Thanks, Sammy. I will surf on Christian and Adrian discussion, because I think that's all about how to revalue what we never looked at the value before. We never look at the value of a building being retrofitted. For the value was the retrofitted building, not what was going on. As energy modeler for a long time, we're looking at theoretical usage of energy at the stage of now, because it was pushed by certification where the criteria was energy cost of today. No certification were using energy demand as criteria, as they were using energy cost. So it was very like time shot at the moment vision. And now we realize that in some country, energy is being multiplied by 5. And this vision of energy cost cannot be used, because, you know, from the first energy analysis or design sketch to delivery of the project, it might go from 2 to 10 years, depending on the economy situation. So, and now I think the big challenge is to value a building that can be constructed, as well as a building that can be deconstructed or dismantled properly, that can be reused somewhere else. And I think that's the main word of moving from down to up, is at least moving horizontally, taking one building who's going to have a certain life and taking part of this building into a new building to reutilize a certain type of glazing, shadow box, flooring type, or mechanical system. Because you see what we see now on the tire manufacturer with Michelin, who stop slowly selling tire, but renting tires. So you're buying kilometers and not anymore rubber. And the idea is what will be happening as well on the energy industry, that we won't be buying an HVAC system. We will be using and renting an HVAC system that's going to have a longer lifespan in another project that might need later on these type of systems. And that's all the value chain and the industrial chain as well is at the moment changing the scope of the value. Because for the longest time, for let's say 40 years, the value was the instant sales, the number of product being sold. And now we're going to look at the value of number of hours, number of degrees, number of kilometers, and that's these values being now reevaluating. And the owner was and that will be the hardest point, is the investor, the developer. Now I get to see the three value of their project and not only the real estate value. And I don't want to go too long because I'm sure Adrian and Christian has a ton to say.
Yes, very interesting. But also, I'm sure that this is a question of many of our audiences as well. That how are we? How difficult is it as a practitioner when you are opening these discussions to the developers, to your clients? How easy is it, and is it necessarily showing the value? Does it always come to the bottom lines of financial values, or now that you see the changes in the industry and the clients are more understanding and more aware? How do you see this, especially in the recent?
It's always a value. If you put yourself as an investor, you have a pot of cash. You have no more than this pot of cash. You have a building to deliver. So you have to be guided on how to make the best of your cash. So if someone tell you, okay, you have an existing building, if you save the structure and you reinforce it, you will save 20% on carbon and maybe 60% on a new structure. That will ring a bell. It might be harder, so you might lose 1 month of construction, but you will be saving on materials, you will be saving on carbon, the value, environmental value of the building will go higher. If you can balance these months due to reinforcing structure by, for example, off-site facade manufacturing, installation will be faster. So you might recover these months loss from structure by using prefab materials. And it's all about having this global value. For a long time, we are looking in very linear, but with different paths, very like a hand. You have one project, and after you get structural, facade, architect, engineer, and everybody was going in his own tube with his own vision, and at the end they get deadlines of drawings for construction set, bam, and they talk at that time. And now we got to mix them, because the question of a structural engineer will impact the architecture, because if you want to have a big opening area, you have no poles in the middle, so that will take into account structure. How do you integrate the facade into it? So that's when as well on the design, and we've been talking about like circular design for a long time, but habits and pressure timed, and I think a lot of the design team are pointing out time and expectation from client of now. We're living on the now time, that you swipe, you choose, you de-swipe, you don't choose, you go up and down, like it's all instantaneous. And the building is not instantaneous, because first it lasts for at least 50 years. It might change 20 times if we keep the same rhythm at the moment of changing usage every 5 times. So we cannot do predict or anticipate something we don't know in only a couple months. So that's as well the big challenge, is taking the time to breathe and to understand what the technology and the industry at the moment, allowing us to be flexible for anticipating today without going too much in safeguards, because that's what costs a lot as well. So it's juggling.
Yes, very good one. Thank you, Luc. Now looking at the time also, we have questions from the audiences, which is one question is very relevant to the design and practice, and I would like to maybe ask Christian this question. We have this question from Gerrit Mering, and it's about a lot of products and construction industry. They come in different forms and sizes, and if we want to push for the strategies of reuse strategies of materials, they get lost in the future purposes. So how do you fix construction with more and less forms and sizes? It could be one option, but it would make more materials, you know, how as a designer, what kind of strategies producers or innovators can use in designing their products, so we can really design for disassembly, we can design for reuse. Yes, if you can maybe answer that question.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I mean, I think you gave part of the answer already yourself, because I think the big issue is obviously when we want to go into circular material, that's the 10 or the 11 R's, right? It's the reuse, it's the repurposing, it's the recycling, it's all of those things that material needs to be able to do. In order to do that, we have to have a few parameters fixed at the beginning of the project, which means one of them is, for example, easy disassembly. So we should avoid gluing, fixing material, composite materials that will stay together for the end of their lives. So it's important to be able to dismantle a building or parts of a building, building components in order to recycle them. There is a certain tendency towards modularity, towards standard formats that also can be used in a different context that one does not know at the moment of building. So that is important. Certain aspects of very banal, but transportability to bring one project from one area to the other. You also need to know, obviously, what you have in house, literally. So tracking and tracing of material throughout the life cycle of a building is important. This helps at the end of the life stage of a building to find back the typical material that is required and maybe can be bought somewhere else. So bookmarks and online, let's say, booking systems to make sure that you know where the materials are is important. But this also helps during the lifetime of the building when it comes to maintenance and repair, because we also can anticipate what the life cycle of a building component is. And this building component can then purposefully be addressed and can be replaced. Also here, I think, again, it's probably you have seen that sort of shell models before. It's important that the different parts of the building that all have different and unique lifespans are accessible independently. You don't want to tear down the structure in order to reach a building part that needs to be replaced every 10 or 15 years or every 20 or 30 years like the facade. So I think that sort of parameters are extremely important to make sure that building material is recyclable. On top of it, the material should not be toxic. Obviously, it should, if it's in a technical cycle, it should be able to be reused, to be recycled. If it's in a biological cycle, it should be able to naturally generate. And I think if we take this into consideration, the base, let's say, for circular building is made. The second thing, which I think is important to that, is that obviously we need users, we need clients, we need investors who are willing to support this. Because what we hear quite a lot from some clients is, yes, we want to make our building future-proof. We embrace the idea of circularity, but we would rather use virgin materials instead of using something that comes from another building somewhere else. I think this is also a change of mindset. Once I think market drivers are getting on this, and maybe also certain regulatory drivers are getting on this, this mindset might be adjusted in one way or another.
Great, thank you so much, Christian. And indeed, I'm going to answer another question from Gerrit. How do you measure the level of circularity in general? For the purpose of the report and also through our work, we have used CTI, Circular Transition Indicator Framework, which has been developed by World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And we have looked at what the fraction of circular inflows were used, for example, recycled steel. And we took that into account as part of all the inputs, and we saw what were the circular outflows as part of the full overall system. Yes, so I hope that answers your question. There's another question from Alexandre Gouvel. Maybe, Luc, you can answer that question. How do you address the underlying user experience problematic? How to make attractive reuse potentially? Yes, as opposed to brand new, flashy looking buildings, and perhaps through selling not only environmentally friendly buildings, but also the lifestyle that goes with those spaces and buildings and yes, and practices.
I'm not sure I will fully answer it, but that's pretty much what I wanted to bounce back from Christian answer early on. Is like, we have no issue when you see some clothing from 1960s to look great, to look maybe changeable and fashionable. But when you look at a building from 1960s, the first thing you want to do is totally change it. I know we have many in France. I hope that in other countries are a bit more sexy, but that's something you look and you're like, oh my God, how design team, and sorry, architect, but how a generation managed to build stuff like that with pure design, energy quality quite low, comfort, it was disastrous as acoustic and so on. So, but the idea is to take the best of a certain period, because if you look at other architecture age, they are design was amazing, or even the core of the design. If you take Haussmannian building in Paris, it was designed to favorite cross ventilation from the street to the court. The court was always shaded, and to create this differential of temperature to be able to get free natural ventilation and free cooling into a stone building with a very high level of inertia, to allow the building to heat once and to kind of keep the heat for a certain time. So the idea is to go back into the building what you have and to make the best of its original design and to make it attractive. And for people, what's an attractive building? It's a people you can buy, so affordable. It's comfortable, so you don't always have to wear mitts and mittens when you have dinner. And it's a building where you don't hear your neighbors. So once you have like a very comfortable overhaul building, it will get attractive. You don't have to be in a hippie to live in an environmental friendly building. You don't have to be a poor one to live with low income and cheap energy. I think a building should be comfortable for anyone. It's like an universal requirement to be, and that might solve some other social issue, but that's another discussion. But the attractive will come from comfort of the building and affordability of it. And it's just finding what criteria will be needed to be improved. It might be the energy performance, it might be the insulation, it might be retrofitting the windows only, and so on. So it's I'm really bad in giving like one solution for all, because there is none. There is as many buildings as questioned, and there is as many questions and designers and cities.
As well as solutions as well. Yes.
Just one look. I think this is a very good, perspective. I think in addition, what needs to happen is also, in line with what Christian said earlier. So new builds today are awfully cheap. They are awfully cheap because they don't consider a lot of the cost, that the building creates. Retrofits today are awfully expensive. They're awfully expensive because the process of retrofitting is one of output of one. So every retrofit is different. So increasing the cost of new build by internalizing the cost of the buildings, and at the same time decreasing the cost of retrofit by making retrofit processes more efficient and more modular, I think contributes to what you just outlined as well.
And that's, you can bounce on valuing on putting a euro or whatever the currency on the weight of the building. I use the word weight to not talk about carbon, because sometimes it can be low carbon, but we're very heavy to change. But having that kind of new value of what coming in and pricing it, and that's true that once you start to look like in certain countries you have like a very intensive carbon vision. When you look at the price of destroying not deconstructing, destroying a building and putting all that into landfill, because we talk about like recycling concrete, which is kind of magic powder, recycling glass, which is another magic powder. Sorry, I hope there is not too many industrial listening to us, but the idea is to really putting a cost of the building life and the material along this entire life, and not just extracting, because at the moment that's what we're looking at, is destroying is a big ball and we building on the same thing with new materials. And that's what we see for the last 2 years at least. The material prices are rising up, just linked to shortage of accessibility, because some cannot come our way, or shortage of availabilities. And so that's something to be careful with. Wood, for example. Wood is great, but need time to grow at one point. So it's all a balance.
Yes, exactly. By saying that, I would like to, we have a very, very limited time, but here are Christian, if you can very quickly tell us about an example project that you used materials, you combined materials and your practice, and yeah, it was a success story in both in achieving your circularity goals and the design.
Yes, that's great. I think I have to ask anybody who's interested to just quickly Google, because architects always need images to show what they do. So if you want to Google QQT by 3XN, QQT is K Quarter Tower in Sydney, Australia. 3XN is us who did it. And the idea of this project was upcycling. So designed from waste of a devalued typical 1970s building in this case. So I think not much better than the French ones from the 60s. So a very standard high-rise building that basically has reached its end of life moment. The idea was whatsoever to reuse that building in such a way that it would create even a higher quality and more value than it has as an original. And again, it would be great to see some pictures with this, but I tried to describe it. An existing 188-meter tall building, which had good floor-to-floor height, which is extremely important. Otherwise, this would have broken probably that idea that's needed for state-of-the-art installation. And it had a structure that was solid enough to reinforce it. Parts of it was demolished in order to add new floor slabs to the existing core. And those extension of new floor plans were implemented with the existing structure intact. So just quickly, a few numbers with this approach. We saved, I have to look it up, 65% of structural columns, beams, and slabs, 98% of all core walls. It doubled the floor area, so it increased gross to net floor ratio, which is very important for a client, for an investor, and it also improved the efficiency of the building. This is a good thing because it's always expensive. Material, labor, and the construction time saved had a value of 130 million Australian dollars, which is an equivalent to 90 million euros. And additionally, with keeping the existing structure, in total 12,500 tons of CO2 emissions could be saved that would have otherwise been produced in a traditional new building. So just as a fact sheet, it's much more fun with images, but please feel free to look it up. And I think it's 14:15. I should not talk anymore.
Thank you so much, Christian. Just on time, I would like to wrap up quickly. First of all, thank you so much, Adrian, Luc, and Christian, and of course, my colleagues who helped in the webinar. Quickly recap, we need to rethink design and practice. Of course, the practice needs to adapt this business models into circularity, and by doing that, we can achieve a lot of our targets through there. We need to use recycled content materials, non-toxic materials, and redesigning and rethinking the way we build products and our materials, and which products and materials we use in our buildings. Thank you so much again. You will receive the copy to the report, dear audiences, and you can read through it. And please feel free to get in touch with either Circular Economy or Bain for any questions that you might have. Wish you a wonderful day, and thank you so much again. Bye-bye.
Bye, all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.